The American Jewish Committee in Seattle released a statement saying they were disappointed in it, that they hadn't been consulted, that to the best of their knowledge, other members of the Jewish community hadn't been consulted by state Democrats when it came to the resolution itself and how it was crafted, certainly not, in the vote. So we're joined today by Regina Sassoon Friedland, who's with the AJC in Seattle, to talk about not only the disappointment in the vote, but also when you have the state Democratic Party that is putting its efforts behind a ceasefire in Gaza, some of the negative implications that that can have here locally. Regina, welcome to Undivided.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be a guest here.
Yeah, I feel like I have been looking at these ceasefire resolutions the wrong way because, when the city of Seattle was trying to do it, just as an example, I looked at it as, oh gosh, what a silly virtue signaling waste of time that's not going to do anything. I mean, Hamas isn't listening to what the Seattle City Council wants to do. But I feel like when I dismiss it like that, maybe I don't acknowledge the hurt that it can cause. So can you just react to the decision of the WSDCC to pass this resolution?
Yeah, and I think it's more, it's not even just the use the word the hurt that it could cause. There's also the real consequences of what it causes. And one of the things I mentioned in the statement to you was that a synagogue, just hours after the Seattle City Council did this, a synagogue was just completely defaced and horribly vandalized. And a synagogue is not that it would make it any better, but it's not an institution where Israel is present anywhere. It's a Jewish institution. And it emboldened, and I would even say encourages behaviors like that. And we do see, I don't have the latest statistics of the uptick since October 7th, but it's rather the numbers are huge where we've had real impacts to the Jewish community in Washington state stemming from things like this. And there's no separation between something that's Jewish in nature, whether it's a community center type thing or a religious institution. They don't need to have the words Israel anywhere around it. And that's what we've been dealing with. So it was very upsetting that they proceeded with something like this, again, at the state level, without input from the Jewish community.
If they had sought input from the Jewish community and Jewish leaders, what would that input have been?
I think that we would have strongly discouraged anything with a unilateral ceasefire because it might sound like a nice thing, we want peace in the region and all of that, but it has very little to do with peace. Basically, Israel has agreed to four ceasefires with Hamas during just the prior conflicts. And with every one of those, Hamas broke them. I mean, there was a ceasefire in place through October 6th. And on October 7th, they broke it. And that was broken. I think the last time they did anything was May of 2021. And it's not, this isn't just Jewish communities saying this. Military and policy experts have also warned that all a ceasefire would do would allow Hamas, which I think we need to remember and should be one of the things that's really prominent, is Hamas is a designated terror organization. This isn't a group of freedom fighters, and they're not just designated such by the United States, also by the EU, Canada, Japan, and many other countries. And that sometimes gets lost in the messaging that we're dealing with a group of terrorists. I think that, and they're state sponsored like Hezbollah is by Iran. Um, so a unilateral ceasefire would just embolden them to regroup, and they have vowed, this is not hidden anywhere, that they would repeat October 7th many times. And I think it's very important that I don't want to use the cliche that keeps going around, when someone said, when they say something, believe them. But I think we need to believe them. There's no reason that we should have trust that this won't happen again. And that's what we're dealing with. So a ceasefire is basically it's just opening it up for Israelis to be killed or anyone that's there. It's not sustainable and it's not realistic.
Do you think it's a lack of knowledge of the situation that leads the state Democrats to do something like this? Or do you think it is sort of virtue signaling? I mean, because not all Democrats are calling for this. I mean, there have been some Democratic members of Congress from our state who have stood up against this sort of ceasefire sentiment and the, from the river to the sea chants and spoken out against those to their own detriment. I mean, Congressman Adam Smith's home was vandalized soon after he spoke out. I believe Congresswoman Kim Schreier has been targeted as well. So for the segment of the Democratic Party in Washington state who is in line with the sort of radical left beliefs on this, what do you think drives it?
I think for some, I don't know that I can say that just in a blank statement. And I think this is just for elected officials in that space and also for the general population that's out rallying for this daily or weekly. They don't understand what's going on. Some of them don't take the time to want to understand what's going on. They're just going to go along, like you said, you just mentioned. Are they virtue signaling? Yes, I think that everything in to those that are well-intentioned, they might see this as a form of the oppressor and the oppressed, and they want to be on the side of the oppressed, and this is what they have to fight against. For those that know a little more about it, I think it comes down to just I think it's just pure, it gets to be anti-Semitic very quickly when you listen
Yes.
to a lot of the rhetoric. And we sometimes dance around that because they're still in a lot of those more radical spaces. They don't want to make a distinction between being so outwardly anti-Israel and anti-Semitism. They try to justify things by saying that the two can be separated. And that's not the case. I want to go back to what you said about the others that have really stood up. And you mentioned Congressman Adam Smith. We are grateful for what we have from state representatives, both from our U.S. senators, Murray and Cantwell, to almost our whole congressional delegation from Washington state that have been supportive of not trying to push for a unilateral ceasefire. There have been other times where they take a pause, and whether it's to let in humanitarian aid or other things like that. But overall, on the federal side, we've been in really good shape. We've also had the Jewish caucus in Olympia has been supportive. And then there's a bill right now. It's bipartisan with Senator Jesse Solomon and Senator John Braun. We're very grateful for things like that. And I personally, and I'll also say it just on behalf of American Jewish Committee and just also speaking for the Jewish community, those things go a long way, and we appreciate that. I think that it shows that they support the safety and security of Jews both at home here and around the world, and it doesn't go unnoticed. The others are it's very problematic, and they keep driving these things, and they're not checking in with the community. They know they're choosing the outliers, or whatever you want to label them.
Yeah. Let's end with this because we've seen this increasing, I would say, criminal civil unrest related to the kind of ceasefire crowd and the pro-Palestine crowd, in some instances, pro-Hamas crowd. I mean, gosh, they went from, ruining a Christmas tree lighting to blocking a bridge to blocking a freeway to blocking a sound transit station, and no consequences for them. And then you have something like this, where it is now the platform, essentially, of Washington state Democrats that they want a ceasefire in Gaza. So to what extent, you touched on it at the beginning, but I want to bring it full circle, to what extent do actions like this from a state party cover or contribute to some of these other actions that we're seeing in our community?
I think they contribute in the sense that they make these actions acceptable. And I think that if they don't get called out from leadership swiftly and unequivocally with, like you mentioned, consequences attached, they're going to increase, because you're not blocking them in any way, shape, or form. And instead of just not blocking it, I think it encourages the justification for these things, and I think it's a problem. I don't want to throw again, like I called out, there are plenty that are really trying,
Yes.
but the radical element is really a problem. And I think if they actually thought through some of the things they were saying, like on allegations of Israel committing genocide, genocide refers to acts that are committed with the intent to destroy, whether it's in part or whole of a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. And the Palestinian population has quintupled since 1967. Those groups do not seem to be interested in facts. Their minds are made up and they just want to proceed with whatever narrative. And they also don't seem to want to recognize that Israel is not at war with the Palestinians, with Muslims or Arabs. They are fighting Hamas, the designated terror organization, whose charter not only calls for the annihilation of Israel, but for the slaughter of Jewish people where they are anywhere in the world. And I think one of the other points that rarely gets mentioned is that there is suffering with the Palestinian people in Gaza, but nobody mentions what is that from? Is this all the making of the Israeli government, as we're set to believe, or is Hamas responsible for a lot of that? I mean, they have prioritized destroying Israel before the safety and security of their own people, which is why they might store their ammunition in a hospital. They put children and the elderly and everyone else, they take cover and they use them as human shields. And it is a little bit maddening when no one is interested in hearing those things, because it's like some of their cries on all of these accusations and allegations seem to be about the suffering of the Palestinians. But what are you doing to try to bolster them, keep them safe and everything else, and let them be on a path to a better life?
Yeah.
And
And
that's not happening.
if it were simply about human suffering, then you'd see them in the streets just as angry about what happened to Israelis. And they're not. They're focused solely on what's happening in Gaza, which it just doesn't, it's very hypocritical.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, absolutely.
Regina Sassoon Friedland, we do appreciate your time and your expertise on this issue. And you're right. I think what we'll do is follow up with all the Democratic leaders in our state who have not gone on the record to condemn some of this behavior and see what they have to say about this ceasefire resolution. So we'll do our diligence on that end. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.